Hi, my name's Joanna. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at CRADLE, the Centre for Research and Assessment and Digital Learning at Deakin University.
Hello, I'm Mary Dracup. I was the Inclusive Education Project Lead at Deakin University for several years until I retired in 2021.
How can UDL and assessment work together?
Assessment is designed to exclude people from a qualification if they're not competent or if they haven't learnt what's required for that qualification. So therefore, the link between assessment and UDL is really important. It's important that we exclude students from their qualification for the right reasons and not for some irrelevant thing, some attribute that they have that has made them perform less well in that assessment. For example, an exam could be excluding a lot of people if they've got, if they find handwriting difficult or if they get anxiety. A lot of people do get anxiety. And it could be also favouring some students who can manage to cram really well and who like to just sort of study at the last minute and thrive on adrenaline. So whether it's actually excluding people for the right reasons is a real question with the exam format.
I think you're right, Mary. And beyond excluding students for the wrong reason, this is a real concern for the validity of assessment, in the sense that if we're not making sure that students are passing when they should pass or not meeting the requirements when they're not actually meeting requirements, then this throws the whole process and meaning of assessment into doubt. So what's really great about UDL and thinking about how to make assessment more inclusive is that it takes into account some of these different ways that people may have capabilities, may express their capabilities, and also how their interests relate to the assessment. And hopefully this means that through more inclusive design using UDL, what happens is that assessments do end up supporting students to learn and to demonstrate their capabilities in the ways in which they are able to.
What key considerations should educators make when developing UDL-informed assessments?
So some key considerations when designing assessments with UDL in mind are really going back to those basic principles of UDL, and I think two of the three are probably most important within the setting of assessment, and the first being around multiple means of representation. And this is actually about the scaffolding of assessment and the way that we communicate assessment instructions and criteria to students. And so what this might mean practically is thinking about the multiple ways in which we can communicate what the task entails. So not just providing a written document, but perhaps also having a video explainer or even having a discussion with students. And this ensures that all students will be able to process and understand what's required of them within the assessment task. The other component of UDL principle, which I think is really important in assessment, is the multiple means of expression. And so this comes back to effectively how students respond to the assessment task. And we might think about this perhaps in terms of different choices that students have or options that they have within sort of a bounded range to think about when they're responding to the task. And I think within this, when we're thinking about what choices could we provide students with, we need to think about the authenticity and the realistic nature of those choices. So for instance, in our research, a lot of the time with students from diverse and equity group backgrounds, they've pointed out that they really like assessment tasks and they really feel they're motivated to participate and do well in them when they can see how it relates to what they might be doing beyond university. And so that's where the authenticity comes into it. So for example, a law student might be more motivated and interested in participating and completing an assessment task where it might result in a client briefing or some kind of discussion paper similar to what they might be doing with their law degree once they complete university.
Yeah, I also think a key consideration when designing assessments is is to think about who might be excluded by any particular assessment. So just to have that in mind and sort of put yourself into the position of many different types of students and just trying to think through whether it's, you're requiring them to do some particular thing which is not really necessary. So it's not really great to be relying on students to come forward and saying, hey, I have difficulty sitting for long periods of time, I need a special adjustment or something like that, to make it an assessment inclusive. It's better really that if you can design in the flexibility in the beginning so that students no student has to sit for a long period to do that assessment, or that no student has to write without their normal computer, or no student has to work without the kind of supports that they would normally have in an assessment. So it could be the kind of furniture that they need, or even recourse to certain texts that they would normally have in an authentic situation. So there's a lot to think about to make an assessment really inclusive, and in fact you'll always probably be excluding some students with particular characteristics, but it's a really important thing to try to tick off as many sorts of ways of excluding students as possible.
You're quite right, Mary. And I think when you were talking about, the things that students would normally have access to, this actually also plays into that idea around authenticity beyond university. We all have access to spell checker. We all have access to the internet in our day-to-day jobs. There are very few situations in which students might be required, to sit in a room for 3 hours and bang something out like an essay. So we should be also thinking about the tools and equipment that students might have access to once they graduate, and how they might be drawing on those. And I think this is really important from an inclusive perspective, because we should be supporting students to be able to draw on the tools that they will have to use in the future to be able to demonstrate the best of their capabilities.
And also, formative feedback is something that you would normally get in a workplace. Someone would tell you if there was something that you could do a little bit better normally. So it's good to design that into assessments as well, and students really benefit from getting that sort of iterative building of their skills and confidence as they go. It's much better to develop their confidence rather than sort of have them guessing until the final exam when suddenly it's a big test and all high stakes and they haven't actually worked out where their strengths and weaknesses are along the way.
What approaches would you recommend for developing UDL-informed assessments?
I think a good approach is to take a programmatic approach to assessment. So looking at the sorts of assessments that the students get to do over the whole of their course, and making sure that they're not always the same type of assessment, but that students get to show their abilities in a variety of ways over the course of the assessment. And also that intended learning outcomes that are needed are picked up along the way, but not overly assessed, so that the students don't always get a high weighting of marks on, say, referencing or something like that, but that all the skills and knowledge that are important are assessed at some point, and not just once, but also that if students perhaps don't do so well in the first assessment, they can pick it up in a later assessment, have another go. I think that kind of an approach can be a really thoughtful and useful approach for students with who don't excel in every method of assessment. And I guess that leads on to the idea of understanding what students' characteristics are. There is quite a lot of information available to teachers now from in terms of the data that's collected on students who come. So they can find out the sorts of locations their students come from. If there are a lot of remote students, for example, their needs are going to be different in terms of technology. If there are students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds as well, that can influence things like whether they can afford textbooks. And other characteristics, disabilities obviously are important. So sort of delving into that data and seeing what students' characteristics are, where their likely pain points are going to be with assessments is, it can really help to set a fair assessment.
And I think sometimes it's actually really hard for us as educators to remember what it was like to be a student, but also to break out of the ways in which we've previously designed assessments and the kind of tasks we've previously set. So what we've found, which has been really helpful in our work and our research, is actually inviting everyone along to the table to have a discussion together. So actually inviting students, and not necessarily current students, but past students who've already experienced that topic or learnt about that area, to come along and make suggestions about what it is that could be altered within assessment, and also inviting along staff from the Access Centre, academic developers, and even colleagues within the same discipline area or even different discipline areas to come and share ideas about assessment. Because frequently there are already very good ideas out there, it's just that we haven't heard about them yet. And so getting everyone along, having opportunities to talk and share ideas around assessment and how it includes or targets particular groups of students has actually been quite effective in our own work.
Yeah, and our last piece of research, sort of one of the points that came out of that was that an incremental approach is okay to improving assessments in terms of universal design for learning. Assessments don't have to be perfect the first time. I mean, we recognise that academics are incredibly busy. There are an awful lot of competing demands on their time and energies. But if you can just make a small improvement each time you do an assessment, perhaps respond to some good suggestions that students have made in surveys or that have come up in class, that kind of thing, then some students are going to benefit from just that small adjustment that you make, and then next time you can try something else, and the improvements will build over time. So it's really important not to be daunted by the whole prospect right from the start, I think, but just to give things a go.
This video was produced for the Universal Design for Learning in Tertiary Education e-learning resource. For more information, visit www.disabilityawareness.com.au.